In last weekend's shipwreck video, we looked at USS Vincennes, one of three American heavy cruisers lost at the Battle of Savo Island, where one of the more noteworthy things wasn't the missing bow, but the collapsed superstructure. Today, however, is almost the reverse of that situation, because on USS Astoria, her missing bow is the big thing about the wreck. Because that bow somehow contrived to remain with the ship after her sinking, not attached to the wreck, but on top of it. Astoria's bow broke off and fell down next to the third turret. Now, with this in mind, let's get into today's video. As always, I'll briefly touch on the sinking before getting to the wreck itself. However, since I've done a video on Astoria and a video on her wreck, this will be a short section. As noted, this cruiser was sunk at the Battle of Savo Island. On the night of August 8, 1942, a force of Japanese cruisers and destroyers engaged Allied forces. They would sink Quincy and Vincennes outright, while severely damaging USS Chicago. Canberra and Astoria were crippled and left burning wrecks. Their crews tried to save the cruisers, but this was a lost cause. Astoria would be abandoned around 11:30 in the morning on August 9, 1942. Her flaming hulk rolled to port and sank by the stern at 12:16 p.m., taking 219 of the crew with her. At this point, the wreck was lost for decades. Her sister Quincy was found in 1992 by Robert Ballard. Astoria would have to wait a couple more decades, with her wreck found in 2015 by Paul Allen's team on Octopus. At a depth of 860 meters, or 2,820 feet. Relatively shallow by Pacific War standards, but still plenty deep. And unlike the similarly shallow Detached, Astoria's wreck has fared fairly well. In 2015, the wreck was quite well preserved, aside from the missing bow. And in July 2025, when Nautilus returned to the wreck, that was still true. Much like Vincennes, Astoria shows very little deterioration from the intervening decade, with one notable exception. And just like the video last weekend, I'll do comparisons where I can. I find it interesting to see the differences, or as the case may be, the lack of differences. Regardless, we'll start with the weaponry once again. Then it'll be the superstructure, such as it is, and we'll finish with the hull. I can hear the questions about the bow, however. Well, that will be in the weaponry section, simply by virtue of where it landed. Though we also have the sonar from 2015 here, where the bow is quite apparent. Now let's start the weaponry, moving from bow to stern. Since Astoria is Vincennes' sister, a lot of this is going to be similar. The overall shape and condition of the turrets, for example. Where things differ is in the orientation. Astoria's number 1 turret is trained far out to port, as you can see here. About as far as it can go, actually. The number 2 turret is out of frame, but you do get a glimpse at a common feature on this wreck. The anchor chain here. That got dragged right along with the bow and is draped over the entire ship. We saw it more in 2015, but it's quite visible here as well. As for the turret, there's not much in the way of damage here. Not from far out, and not from close in. The rusting is relatively minimal, and there's no shell holes here. The barrels are also intact, unlike the damaged equivalent on Quincy. We also see more of that chain and the number 2 turret's barrels. However, as we move further down the turret, things don't look quite as good. The turret itself is largely fine. There's some interesting discoloration here. I'm not sure what caused that, but it's quite apparent. as is the damage to the barbette here. The ring had a chunk taken out of it, where the deck also collapsed. That damage, just beneath the turret face, would match up with 2 hits on the damage plate. Hits 3 and 4, both by 8-inch guns. Hit 5, meanwhile, isn't apparent on any of the survey images. That aside, let's move on. We get another angle on the barbette here, although the more notable thing is definitely the deck collapse. We see this much better in the next picture. The downward angle is pretty clear, as is the anchor chain snaking up and over the rear of the turret. The turret itself is mostly fine. No shell hits, with the ladder and rangefinder ear both intact. And both are more visible in the next picture, along with that weird discoloration. Beyond this, we start to move further forward, such as here towards the very front of the turret. The barrels covered in coral, but otherwise all right, and all flat and level as well. Anyway, we can see more of the chain again, stretching between the 2 turrets. It's just as apparent in the next picture from directly in front of the turret, which is, admittedly, a nice look down the barrels. And the next picture is a nice look down at the barrels. Not to mention our first good look at the number 2 turret beyond the shadowy background shots. Again, all the barrels are fine, despite that chain wrapped up and over them. Here, at least, the bow did no damage as it fell away, not even when you move further down. Though we do have what looks like a shell hit here that isn't on the damage plate. It could just be rusted metal, but to my eye, it looks much more like a hit. Either way, these last couple images are a good point to bring in the first octopus picture. We don't really have a good direct comparison, but these are close enough. And unsurprisingly, there's not much difference in the wreck. Everything seems to be about the same. In any case, as we move on, we move back to a view at the top of the number 1 turret. Not much to note here, other than the lack of any damage or paint. The more interesting look comes here from further down, where we see the chain draped over the back of the turret, though the coral does make it harder to pick out. It's, surprisingly enough, easier to make out from further out. It sticks out a bit more, though it helps that you can see the base of it here, and when you move a bit further along, you can see it even better. This isn't chain that fell out of the chain locker, like presumably happened on Maya. Here, it's the chain from the deck. Okay, it still comes from the chain locker, just not because that broke open this time. That aside, we'll wrap up the bow turrets here, with some shots from further out. Here we have the number 1 turret still showing no major damage, either to the turret or the barrels, and that applies to both sides of the turret as well. Although on the starboard side, the break in the hull is more apparent, along with the chain stretched over the rangefinder ear and the turret side. That said, we finished here. Now for the stern turret, and paradoxically the bow. Here we have the first look at the number 3 turret. Much like the bow pair, the barrels looming out of the darkness. Not exactly the most detailed look, but I felt it was a fitting image to start with. Plus, you can see some details on the deck, like what seems to be a jammed open hatch here. Meanwhile, as we move further along, we see the turret itself. Just like the other 2, there's not much in the way of visible damage. A look at the damage plate shows very few hits to Astoria's stern, and only 2 to the barbette of the stern turret. That's left the upper part completely intact. And as you can see here, mostly clear of debris. Unlike Vincennes, this turret isn't buried. The only debris I can pick out is a bit of metal here, and of course the chain further back. We see both of those much better in this picture, along with the bow to the side. As you can see in this image from Octopus, not much has actually changed. In 2015, the bow was pressed up to the rangefinder ear with the chain draped over it. The biggest change that I can pick out, at least from this angle, is that the bow has fallen down. In 2015, it was well above the chain. In 2025, it's fallen down on top of it. Most likely the deck collapsing beneath it after holding up the weight of the bow for 83 years. I'm impressed it's held up that long, honestly, and it's a testament to Astoria's builders. Anyway, as we move back to the stern turret, we get a closer look from the side. It's a bit blurry due to the distance it was taken from, but we can see the chain better as well as the tip of the bow, which has definitely fallen down. It's not pressed up to the turret like it used to be. You can see this a bit better here, along with the shape of the turret itself. As for the next couple pictures, they move up and over the turret to look at the back. More of that chain is visible as a result, along with some interesting details, like the rivets holding the rangefinder on here, or of course, the blurry bow to the back, which is much more apparent here, something that also shows how the chain comes up from underneath the bow, not over it. An interesting detail considering how it's draped over everything else. And as we move further on, another interesting detail shows up: the deck next to the third turret. Remember, this is completely caved in on both Quincy and Vincennes to varying degrees. On Astoria, it's fine. The stern hasn't really collapsed at all. Considering the damage to the rest of her hull, that is impressive. However, we've reached the end of the third turret. This image shows a good look at the top and the side, while this one gives us a good framing shot of the barrels, though both of them don't show much new aside from this bit of debris here. Closer inspection makes that look like a powder case. It's a bit shinier and is the right shape, but without a better look, I can't say that for 100% certain. So, with that in mind, let's shift to the bow, the detached part, not the main hull. First, we have the anchor here. This has remained firmly in place both in the sinking and the decades since, despite, as you can faintly see here, a pretty nasty break just behind it. We see this better from the side here. Just a couple feet further, and the anchor would have been lost too. And I don't say that lightly when you move just a little further along. Here, the bow vanishes. We didn't really get a good look at this from Octopus, unfortunately, so I can't say how bad it was in 2015. The closest we get is this from further down, which does give a hint of the damage here. So, in the lack of contradictory evidence, I'd say this damage comes from the initial break. As for that damage, there's not really much to say. The bow is torn and twisted, with some particularly shiny metal here, and a bunch of debris towards the bottom. We see that debris better here, along with a porthole on the shinier metal. And for that matter, more of the side of the bow stretching into the darkness, both in this image and in this one here. It's safe to say more of the bottom of the bow came along than the top, which you can see where it comes to an end here, caving in Astoria's deck, and wiping out a gun tub. Now, to wrap up the bow, we'll return to the deck. Here's the tip, further fallen down next to the stern turret, but otherwise intact and recognizable in its shape, while the last two images show evidence for my theory that the deck is collapsing, not the bow itself. You can see an angle on Astoria's side here, with the bow sinking in. It's not quite as apparent from above here, But when you turn back to the 2015 image, well, the deck wasn't that bad. Slightly caved in here, but not to the same extent. Though without a better look at it, my theory remains a theory. So, let's wrap up the weaponry, starting with the 5-inch guns. We have one here, pointing straight up. There's 2 reasons I started with this one. First, the excellent look at the mount and its inner workings, including the elevation gear here. And second, for the caved-in deck behind it. That's going to be a recurring theme here. And when you look at the next image, it's all the more apparent. This mount is tilted widely over, like the stern Chicago pianos on Vincennes or Quincy. Now, this isn't to say that all of them are this bad. This one, for instance, is pretty flat, though the gun tub has fallen down a bit. There's debris behind it, though it's not clear. But the mount itself, that's about as good as you could expect it to be. On the other hand, when we return to the first one, well, there's a ton of scattered debris here. The remnants of the funnels and the other superstructure. I couldn't begin to pick out specific details in that twisted mess. Something that continues as we move along to this mount. The deck around it is almost entirely gone, leaving just the mount's base left. Give it some more time, and this will fall clean through. Which has already happened to this one. It's also angled up, but you can tell it's a different one because of the deck. That's completely collapsed, leaving the mount precariously balanced on its base. It's severe damage, to say the least. Despite this, however, the gun tub is still mostly there, even if everything behind it isn't. This damage, and similar damage across the amidships section, is severe. As Astoria went under, the ship was still burning fiercely below decks. That likely weakened things and contributed to this collapse. Alternatively, the bow tore things up on the way to its resting place. That's almost certainly what happened to the aft superstructure. But with the relative lack of damage on the bow, I can't say for sure that's what happened here. In any event, when we turn to the front of the gun tubs, the damage isn't as apparent. The debris, yes, but not the damage. You can almost forget just how bad it is in favor of, well, these look about the same as any other American wreck. Something that was also the case with this one back in 2015. The gun mount and its surroundings were pretty fine as these things go. Although, as this one shows, even from the side, the damage is apparent in places. Namely how bad the collapse to the center is, as well as some broken steel here. While this one here is covered in crumpled debris. If I had to guess, bits of the bridge tower and the forward funnel. But I can't be certain. The next one, for its part, isn't as bad. The deck is collapsing, yes, but the mount is fine. And the same goes for its gun tub, as is also the case for this one, though there is more damage to the deck here. It's also the final 5-inch gun, so we can finish things off with the Chicago pianos on the stern. The quad 1.1-inch cannon mount to be more formal. This is another area where very little has changed. The mount is still broadly intact and recognizable, and in basically the same condition as it was back when Octopus took a look a decade ago. Right down to the coral, the rust patterns, and the hose stretched over the top. We don't see the other one as well, but it seems to be in similar shape, and the deck between both of them, debris aside, is in one piece as well. It's certainly better than the equivalent area on her sisters. Either way, that wraps up the weaponry. Longer than usual, but that's because of the bridge being included. And it would have been longer had Nautilus filmed any of the 20mm guns. They did not, so here's the octopus images for completion's sake. Now to finish this video off with the superstructure and hull. First, we have the catapult base here, with a very clear shell hole at the bottom. The rest of it, on the other hand, is more intact. There's very little damage beyond the rusting, and of course the missing catapult. We actually see that, but not where you'd expect. You see, not only did Astoria's bow fall on her stern deck, her stern fell on top of her catapult as well. It's here, and that's a first to my knowledge. I've never seen another wreck do something like this. Unfortunately, as we move on from here, things do get less recognizable. I won't linger long on any of these pictures because there's not much to say. It's a sea of broken wood and collapsed steel. Every part of Astoria's deck, from the catapults forward, is busted in. It only varies in degrees of severity, and none of these images are particularly pretty as a result. The same goes for the debris that fell to the side here. I can't pick out any sort of details on what this used to be. It's all too badly torn up to make that out. From the front all the way to the back here. On the other hand, this curved bit here seems to have a porthole. That still doesn't really say where it came from, but it's an interesting note. That aside, as we look further ahead, I think this might be from the bridge. Not because of these pictures, but because of this one. That's part of her mast, as you can see here when we move further up from the seabed. Right up to here, the base for a rangefinder. How this ended up off the side of the ship isn't clear, though it might again be from the bow. If that took out the bridge on the way to the stern, well, it explained things. As well as the bit here, where things have collapsed inward, or here behind the number 2 turret, where the deck just ends, a dark void where everything collapsed, a collapse that applies further forward where the bow broke as well. It's about as rough as you'd expect for how badly the bow tore away. Nothing but broken steel falling toward the bottom, either from afar or from closer in. That said, let's end this lengthy video on the stern, where we have some debris off to the side here, near where the catapult pokes out beneath the prop guard. While the stern itself is fine, there's a shell hole here, but despite this, the name Astoria is still legible, mostly. And further up, the deck is in one piece with little apparent damage. It makes a striking comparison to her sister ship when you look at the final image here. But that's Astoria in a nutshell, both like and unlike her sisters. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.